and also behavioral health and addictions as we move through toward the end of this presentation. I want to thank our Executive Director, Ivanka Hall, for giving us the opportunity, the platform to be able to coordinate and work on such an important topic. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning, and our guests and our speaker for today, and in getting up early as he's on the West Coast, but thank him for his research and his advocacy and his dedication over many decades. And I want to thank also those who are with the Center for Black Health and Equity, Mr. Kenneth Ray and Greg Bolden and others who were working in partnership on this project to get menthol out of, and other flavored products out of cigarettes in Cleveland and at the local level. The long-term strategy is to have legislation that, as our Executive Director says, has a number and is on the docket and can lead to efforts like in other states to get those products out of our communities. And so we'll, time permits, give you more details about that, going forward. But this National Lung Month event that you're here for today is one of our efforts along our education campaign to eventually lead to that end goal and project, which we're determined that we will achieve. And so let me, without further ado, welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Phillip Gardiner. And he is a public health activist, administrator, evaluator, and researcher. And for the past 30 years, Dr. Gardiner has worked on studies ranging from hypertension, multiculturalism, and AIDS to breast cancer, prostate cancer, diabetes, and smoking. Dr. Gardiner received his doctorate in behavioral sciences from the University of California at Berkeley, where he focused on youth violence as a public health issue. Throughout his research career, Dr. Gardiner has maintained his community activism to address racial disparities in health through writing, organizing, evaluating, and public speaking. Currently, he is the UC Smoke and Tobacco Free Fellowship Awards Program Officer for the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program, the University of California Office of the President. He also oversees the scientific inquiry associated with e-cigarettes and other new products. In this regard, Dr. Gardiner speaks regularly around the country on the triangulum, the intersection of tobacco, marijuana, and e-cigarettes. And for the past 15 years, Dr. Gardiner has spoken at many national, state, and local meetings calling for the restricted sale of menthol and flavored tobacco products. He's also an adjunct faculty member at Touro University in Vallejo, California, a graduate medical college where he teaches a course on health disparities. Certainly, last but not least, Dr. Gardiner is co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, AATCLC, a group of Black professionals dedicated to fighting the scourge of tobacco still impacting the African American community today. And we welcome you, Dr. Gardiner, for our Rhapsody in Black Conversation, a national call for menthol-free communities. And we want to turn it over to you. And again, thank you for your expertise, your advocacy, and your work over many decades. And we're grateful to be in partnership with you and grateful to hear your voice today. Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Well, look, thank you, Zachary. What's interesting, I think that's an old bio. Actually, I retired last year, but it was just last year. I just retired last year from the university, both of California and Touro University. And then the pandemic hit. So I retired and then there's the pandemic. So, sometimes you get what you ask for. So I'm going to try and share my screen so we can get this started. You need to allow me to share my screen, or whoever's in charge there.
You have been granted.
She giveth and she taketh away. Thank you. Okay, I think this is the one we want. Should take a moment to come up. Okay, folks can see that. I'm going to try and go to full screen. If it gets too big, sometimes I'm not sure why.
Dr. Gardiner, if you push that little button at the top that says share in the right-hand corner, you will be able to, there you go.
Yeah. So everybody can see it. Is anything cut off?
Looks great.
Okay, look, thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm a co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. We've been doing this work for some 12 years trying to deal with the question of menthol cigarettes. I'm pleased to be here for the Rhapsody and Black meeting, a call to free menthol-free communities. Let me tell you, this is not a minor matter, and I'm going to try and go through this. I've seen a number of people on the call already know this story. Hopefully the people that don't know the story that well will benefit from it. So thank you for having me. This is essentially what I would call a framework for our time, and this is what I think grounds what we're doing, and at least grounds what I'm doing. Menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars have been and are the main vectors of death and disease in Black, brown, and other poor communities of color. The COVID-19 pandemic has just thrown a spotlight on the health disparities and unequal treatment that poor colored communities have faced for hundreds of years in the United States. At this time, nothing could be more helpful in saving Black lives and showing that Black lives matter than getting menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars straight out of the Black community. And not to put too sharp of a point on it, this is a study that was just done, that was just published in August of this year. And if anything, why we need to remove menthol from the marketplace, this study shows it. That between 1980 and 2018, menthol cigarettes were responsible for 1.5 million new smokers, 157,000 smoking-related premature deaths, and 1.5 million years lives lost among African Americans. This is the data. When we go to the city council, this should be the first thing that people put forward. This is what's killing Black folks. While African Americans constitute only 12% of the total US population, 50% of all new smokers, 41% of smoking-related premature deaths, and 50% of the total menthol-related harm is from menthol use in the Black community. So let's be clear when we're talking about this. Black lives matter. Remove menthol from the marketplace. So I'm going to just take a step back here and talk about the African Americanization of menthol cigarettes, 60 years of predatory marketing. Think of it this way, that after World War II, Black people returned to the United States, many moving from the South to the North and into the West into segregated situations. Different companies began to develop different products, specifically different hair products, different eating products, different cooking products for the segregated communities. In particular, there were different smokes for different folks. Brown and Williamson in the late 1950s and early 60s held a series of focus groups throughout the United States and determined from those focus groups that the messages seen on television resonated more with Black folks than they did with white folks, to the point where they put 91% of their budget into TV advertising. They began to use male actors with more Black features. They tripled cigarette advertising in ebony. They began to use our idiom, menthol's got a brand new bag, a la James Brown, cool jazz, cool lexicon. And I guess what we really could spend a long time on, my colleague, Dr. Valerie Yerger has spent a lot of time on this, is that smoking with the enemy, the tobacco industry put millions and millions of dollars into Black organizations, into Black political organizations, health organizations, HBCUs, Alvin Ailey Dance Troupe, the NAACP, you name it, they bought it. And this is the assault that took place and began in the late 50s and early 60s. If you take anything away from what I say today, it's this little chart here. In 1952 and 1953, only 5% of African Americans smoked menthol cigarettes. By 1968, it had almost tripled to 14%. By 1976, it had tripled again to 44%. And by 2006, it had doubled to 82%. Today, 85% of African-American adults and 93 to 94% of African-American youth smoke menthol cigarettes. So where did this come from? This came from the predatory marketing of dumping these products in our community. This is an ad for menthol cigarette Salem in 1958. Salem, of course, just came on the market in 1956. New filtered brand. Here's a white couple in a meadow, refreshing your taste, et cetera, et cetera. By 1963, though, here's Elston Howard, catcher for the New York Yankees, selling us Kool cigarettes. It began to be clear. Remember, in 1963 is the March on Washington. In 1963 is the Birmingham church bombing. In 1963, you can't even get a job some places. Tobacco industry is ahead of this and is getting Black people out front on television and in your face selling these deadly products. By the late 60s, early 70s, they've taken it completely to another level. Here's brother in dashiki, beads, afro, a whole new bag of menthol smoking. Again, the bag, the James Brown, and as we mentioned earlier before, they tripled the advertising in ebony. This is the mid-1970s, brother in a suit and a tie playing basketball. Of course, Black folks like basketball, and we'll come back to this. Remember, it says alive with pleasure. By the late 80s, everybody's into the game. Winston's got a menthol cigarette. It's real, it's rich, and it's cool. The 1980s was really the deal where the menthol wars broke out. This great article by colleague Dr. Valerie Yerger, Racialized Geography. They began to have sampling vans traveling around in the Black community, high traffic areas, at parks, known streetcars, daily routes. In 1979, 1980, I lived in New York City. And I remember I lived in Brooklyn, I worked in Harlem, and I would take the subway, and it came up out of the subway in Harlem, and there was this van blaring music. I forget the music, but I remember they were giving away packs of cigarettes, and they're giving away menthol cigarettes. And of course, I took a pack. I was the menthol smoker at that point. Everybody was into it. Kools, Newport, Salem's, Benson and Hedges, all of them had vans, and they did this throughout the United States. You wonder why that little chart I showed you tripled. I mean, doubled every few years. This is the early 90s. Again, our idiom, fire it up. Newport pleasure. And I look back, think of this. I'm going to just back it up. Here it is, alive with pleasure. Here it is 20 years later, it's Newport pleasure. They had to take alive out of that because alive and smoking, people knew that that doesn't fly. Their new focus groups told them that, and they began to do that. That's the early 90s. By the early 2000s, they're continuing to do this. And notice the outline in the back, enticing the woman. Look at what they're trying to sell you in terms of this. By 2004, there's the Kool Mixx campaign. Coast to coast, head to head, the DJ battle is on. Look at how they appropriate our culture. If I go back to the 1960s, at the brother with the dashiki, here we have hip hop. The Kool Jazz Festival, they took over a large part of our culture to sell us these death sticks. Let's be clear about that. The Kool Mixx campaign of 2004 capitalized on hip hop in the Black community. This nationwide mixing and scratching was to culminate in Chicago, local opposition by African-American groups, and then lawsuits brought by the attorney generals of New York, Massachusetts, and Illinois blocked the national meeting in Chicago. Be appraised by 2004, this is about 6 years after the Master Settlement Agreement. And the Master Settlement Agreement didn't allow for the type of marketing that was going on. But most importantly, look at each of those symbols that you see on the screen. This is a pack of cigarettes. In 2003 and 2004, these were the way that Kools were being sold. You think they're aimed, or they targeted someone in specific? So let's stop for a minute and let's be clear that what is menthol, what it does, and I would suggest to you that it's much more than a flavor. In fact, it's the ultimate candy flavoring because it allows the poison to go down easier. It's an anesthetic by definition that masks the harsh taste of smoking, leads to a numbing and cooling sensation. It allows for deeper inhalation. The deeper you inhale, the more nicotine and toxins you take in. The more nicotine and toxins you take in, the more addicted you become. The more addicted you become, the harder it is to quit. Mentholated cigarette smoking inhibits nicotine metabolism, meaning that once nicotine gets into your liver, when it becomes cotinine, menthol slows down the metabolism of the nicotine, allowing it to stay in your body longer. The tobacco industry knows all this. This is where I found out about it, was from the tobacco industry. Independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters. Let's be clear, these are big words. The punchline is if you smoke menthol cigarettes, it produces more nicotine receptors in your brain. They want to be filled, they cry for it, you become more addicted. We actually know this, there's data on this. Increases salivary flow, transbuccal drug absorption. In English, that means if you chew tobacco that has menthol in it, it crosses the gum barrier much more effectively. And probably most problematic is the greater cell permeability, meaning if there's menthol in the cigarettes that you're smoking, that it penetrates the cell wall much more efficiently if it isn't in there. Then if to add insult to injury, every year, they don't do this anymore, but every year the tobacco industry used to hold a scientific conference. In 1993, that conference was on menthol. And this is where I got this, this chart from. In 1993, this is that all cigarettes, all tobacco products have some menthol in it. The ones we've been talking about, the characterizing flavors, the Kools, the Newports, the Salems, and et cetera, they have the strong effect. But pipe tobacco, chewing tobacco, Winston's, Marlboros, they all have some menthol in it. And the reason they all have some menthol in it is for all the reasons I just went over with you in the first place. The more menthol they have in it, the greater that impact. And you can see how it has disproportionately impacted African Americans. Racial difference in cotinine clearance. We already mentioned that it stays in the body longer. It has a greater half-life among African Americans. And then interestingly, and this isn't true necessarily all the time, but generally speaking, menthol cigarettes have greater nicotine content in them, and African Americans disproportionately smoke cigarettes with greater nicotine content. It's a setup, frankly. Melanin and nicotine. Melanin is the substance that gives your skin color. Nicotine is stored in tissues that contain melanin. So the punchline, the darker your skin means the more nicotine is stored in your body. It's stored more in the body. It metabolizes slower. It penetrates cells more efficiently. There's more marketing going on in the Black community. It's a setup. It's been a setup for over half a century. Menthol is harder to quit. Here we have menthol smokers make more attempts to quit, nearly 10% more, but they're less successful, meaning 15%, almost 15, 13.8, almost 15% less successful. They're more addictive and they're harder to quit. This is what menthol is. That's what this whole discussion's about. And we need to take this into our city council meetings and explain to people what the tobacco industry is doing to us. Predation. The action of attacking or plundering where a predator, in this case the tobacco industry, feeds on its prey, the African American community and other marginalized groups. It's a great slide from Tanisha Wright. I was on a program yesterday with her in West Virginia. She worked on the Kool Mixx campaign and was so appalled by what and how racist it was that she left the tobacco industry and brought documents with her that she shared with the tobacco control movement. The punchline here is that this is tobacco industry words, that they're focus communities and non-focus communities. Of course, focus communities are inner city, colored, and poor. Non-focus communities are upscale, suburban, rural, and white. and menthol cigarettes are cheaper in the non-focus community. And we have data, in the focus communities, and we have data to support this. Here's a great study by Lisa Henriksen at Stanford University, predatory marketing patterns. This is the essence of what's going on here. As the percentage of African-American students increased, the proportion of menthol ads increased. They did a study that they looked in California around different schools and actually found that as there were a greater number of African-American students, there was more menthol advertising. Duh. We actually have the data that supports that. The proportion of menthol advertising we saw increased by 5.9%. I just showed you that, the dose response relationship. Newport promotions were 42% higher, and the cost of Newports was 12 cents lower. That's California. This is Massachusetts. Storefront cigarette advertising differed by racial and ethnic community. Brookline being an upscale white community, and Dorchester historically being a more poor community, predominantly Black, a little bit more diversified now, but generally a much poorer community. The take-home message, there are significantly more ads in Dorchester. The ads were significantly larger in Dorchester. The menthol ads were way more in Dorchester. And I guess what is most disturbing about all of this is the price of a cigarette the price of a pack of cigarettes was 50 cents cheaper in Dorchester. They want to make it cheap so that poor people and Black people can buy these products, and it's outrageous and it should be stopped. Uptown, show you right. These people, the tobacco industry is so into this. By the mid to late 80s, they began to market special products that are aimed at Black people that were menthol cigarettes. So Uptown, the place, the taste. Many of you know, I lived in New York, so I know it well. Where is Uptown? Uptown is Harlem. Downtown is Manhattan, okay? It's got the Uptown taste with the downtown price. They knew what they were doing the whole time. They did this in a number of different cities. They even had Malcolm X brand that came out in 1995. Of course, it too was disbanded. Uptown cigarettes, though, were marketed in Philadelphia. They were going to test this in the Philadelphia Black community. And in 1989, they wanted to launch it. And during Black History Month in 1990, I mean, the tobacco industry has no shame. Local coalitions led by the National Association of African Americans for Positive Imagery, National Black Leadership on Cancer, the NAACP, the American Cancer Society, American Lung, and others exposed this marketing. In fact, Louis Sullivan, who was then Secretary of Health and Human Services, flew to Philadelphia and called out Reynolds to withdraw Uptown. They ended up getting rid of it. I don't have time to go through all the things that went on in the 90s. That's a whole nother presentation, but I thought I'd share this. Menthol Joe, remember Joe Camel came out in the early 90s, but by 1997, they had Menthol Joe. And of course, Menthol Joe, if you notice, he's Black. Say no to Menthol Joe. The Black, popular, these were ads that were run in Black magazines. Menthol Joe wasn't run in any white magazines. Again, the NAAPI launches a national campaign joined by Children Count Coalition, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and others. Demonstrations took place around the country, including in Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Reynolds suspended Menthol Joe following these protests. I would suggest to you, and this is coming toward where I'm going. I hope I'm not. Yeah, no, we have plenty of time. Punchline here is that menthol is a sacrificial lamb. This is clearly one of my favorite slides. I've had this slide in my slide deck for some time because it is a sacrificial lamb. I would suggest to you that the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act that was proposed in 2008 and enacted in 2009 was a deal with the devil. You essentially had an agreement between Southern senators, the tobacco industry represented by Philip Morris, and unfortunately some representatives of the tobacco control movement agreed that there should be the elimination of flavors in 13 flavors in cigarettes, but they excluded menthol. When they excluded menthol, they essentially threw African Americans, women, youth, Native Hawaiians, Filipinos, folks from the LGBTQ community, Puerto Ricanos, folks with behavioral health issues, the homeless, all the marginalized groups were thrown under the bus. And Black folks were, of course, at the head of the list. And as I showed you the figures earlier, have died disproportionately from this. If they'd have stopped this in 2009, hundreds of thousands of lives would have been saved in the first place. The fight to ban menthol takes off. Many of us went back to Washington, D.C. to testify to the FDA's Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee in 2010, 2011. There are numerous scientific journals published on the harm of menthol, to the point where the TIPS Act, the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee, came out with their report that said the removal of menthol products from the marketplace would be beneficial to the public health. Of course, the Office on Management and Budget sat on this report until early 2013, but many of us who were close to the situation knew what it said and knew when they said it. In 2013, the Public Health Law Center put forward the Citizen Petition. The Citizen Petition argued that it had been 18 months. This is what's great. It had been 18 months since the FDA reported that the removal of menthol from the marketplace would be beneficial to public health. That was our rationale. Why haven't you removed it? It's been 18 months. Signed by all the leading groups around this. Of course, in 2020, after the FDA became aware of the lawsuit against them, they said that they would respond to the citizens' petition in January of 2021. Of course, they didn't respond until April of 2021. Chicago, the first city to restrict the sale of menthol products. A number of us traveled to Chicago and worked with folks there in 2013. They passed a law that created a buffer zone around schools, 500 foot. Health Department mayor took the lead in this. We met with Rahm Emanuel, who was the mayor at this time, and he seemed to be quote unquote down for this. Town halls were held all around the city to discuss it. The tobacco industry came out and put out their side, and we came out and put out our side. And of course, we got ministers, we attended church services, we went to Black colleges, Black community groups, we met with Black aldermen. It was a full court press in Chicago. By 2013 and 2016, some groups stopped smoking with the enemy. Remember, I told you early on that everybody was taking money from the industry. It took 50 years, but punchline is that Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc. passed a national resolution calling for menthol to be removed from the marketplace and encouraged local chapters to get involved. Both resolutions were developed by Dr. Valerie Yerger, who's a professor at UCSF and a member of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. In 2016, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People passed a national resolution calling on local chapters to join the fight to ban menthol. Resolution was developed by Carol Magruder. Carol Magruder is my counterpart. She's the other co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. So some groups stopped smoking with me. Of course, in San Francisco, the major victory was the first American city to restrict the sale of menthol and all flavored tobacco products citywide, period, end of discussion. And the Board of Supervisors in June of 2019 unanimously passed its e-cigarette restrictions until they get FDA approval. And we could have a whole discussion about how the FDA is messing up that process too, but that's a different discussion. This is just a sense of, give you a broader, I could have updated this, but I thought I'd just keep this in. Over 207 jurisdictions around the country have flavor restrictions. 65, I think it's up to 91 now, but I think 65 jurisdictions have menthol restrictions, and then 2 states have menthol restrictions, Massachusetts and California. Be appraised that in June of 2020, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council sued the FDA. We sued the FDA for dragging their feet on the question. Remember, this is 2020. Remember, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act was passed in 2009. This is 11 years afterwards. They still hadn't done anything on menthol. We were joined in this lawsuit by Action on Smoking and Health, the American Medical Association, and the National Medical Association. Of course, the defendants were the Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and the Center for Tobacco Products. What's so problematic and egregious about this is Mitch Zeller, who's the director of the Center for Tobacco Products, was part of national conferences that we held in 2002 and 2009 on menthol, which called for getting menthol off the marketplace. In fact, Mitch Zeller was on the steering committee in 2009. How times have changed. The FDA finally acted on April 29th, and there was a whole hoopla that went on, and there was some good, but we're going to have to review the bad and the ugly too. The good, of course, is that they said they'd start making the rulemaking process. They admitted that menthol should be removed from the marketplace and included rulemaking around flavored cigars, little cigars, something that we hadn't thought that they would do. And importantly, they mentioned cessation and said they would work with other federal agencies to identify funds that could be used to increase cessation. Let's be clear, if you're going to get these products out of our community, then there needs to be some help supplied with that. And cessation services that are culturally appropriate need to be developed. Of course, the bad is this. The rule won't even be made public until next April. When the rule is made public, there will be 60-day comment period, which the tobacco industry historically has then got extended to 90 or 120 days. Last time there was a rulemaking process put in place in 2017, over 400,000 comments were put in by the tobacco industry. I'm not making this up. This is on public record. 400,000. It took months to even go through all of them. Once that they get through all of them, this will have to be kicked upstairs to the Office on Management and Budget, who will take another number of months to go over this and make their changes and amendments. And once it comes back down, we get to the ugly. When the final rule will be put forward, the tobacco industry will sue, and probably sue more than once. The whole idea is to slow the process down and make things as difficult as possible so they can still keep making money and frankly still killing Black folks. Just what's going on here in California, just to give you a sense of the power of the tobacco industry. On August 28th of 2020, last year, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill passed by both the House, both by the Assembly and the Senate in California. 3 days later, that was on a Friday, on a Monday, the tobacco industry announces a referendum campaign, and they filed papers then. They spent over $20 million to collect over 650,000 signatures to block the implementation. Unfortunately, it will be on the ballot a year from now in November. It exempts hookah, premium cigars, loose leaf tobacco. We're encouraging people at the local level not to take these exemptions. We can have a whole discussion about each one of these, but that's what took place in the state of California. Given that that has gone on, this is what I'm saying to you, is that the fight must continue. We can't wait on the state or the FDA. Lives are at stake. We must continue to fight for local and state bans on menthol. It's been 12 years since the passage of the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act in 2009. I would call that the original sin. And as you see from the data I showed you in the beginning, hundreds of thousands of Black lives didn't have to die if they'd have done what was right in the first place. Enough is enough. The take-home message here is that menthol is a social justice issue. The disproportionate marketing and targeting of candy-flavored poison to African Americans and other specially oppressed sectors of our society is outright discriminatory and genocidal. We're talking about poorest folks who are least informed and with the fewest resources. Indeed, it is the definition of preying on the most vulnerable sections of our society. If menthol were banned, hundreds of thousands of lives would be saved. We already showed you one data. There's another study that if only 30% of the people who smoke menthol cigarettes, not 50, not 80%, if only 30% of the people who smoke menthol cigarettes quit, over 500,000 lives would be saved. Over a quarter of a million of them would be Black folks. So what's at stake? It's our future, it's our kids, it's our lives. Here's young man, hat on backward, baggy pants, sitting on a skateboard and surrounded by tobacco advertising. This is what's at stake. This is what we're fighting about. This is what this is all about. With that, I want to thank you for having me. I know I've run my mouth. Many of you have heard this a number of times. Some of you may not have. Again, I'm the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. This is how you can run into me and my organization. And with that, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I look forward to any questions or discussions that we have on this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gardiner. Appreciate the very insightful and informative presentation. Now we want to open up to any questions that you may have for Dr. Gardiner. If you have any questions, either please put them in the chat or we will give you an opportunity to ask them of Dr. Gardiner. If you just raise your hand using the hand function, we will be sure to call on you. First question from our executive director, Dr. Gardiner. Have you seen a link between lead poisoning and smoking in the African American community?
I can't say that I have. Unfortunately, we know the lead poisoning in the water that, unfortunately, there's a great article recently showing, across, not only what went down in Flint, Michigan, but in other parts of Michigan that white folks are drinking pure water and that lead is showing up in, unfortunately, in Black communities. I don't know of it can't be good for you to drink lead water and smoke cigarettes. I know that, but no, there's not a direct correlation.
Yes, sir. Mr. Ray asks, what can local organizations from the Center for Black Health, Equity and Equity, what can local organizations do to fight for themselves on this issue?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's the question. I think people need to come together, identify key players in their community, both religious parts of the community, health experts. There's the National Medical Association has offices in Cleveland. The NAACP has offices in Cleveland. The Delta sorority has, folks in Cleveland. American Cancer Society, American Lung, American Heart. You have to build a coalition that's broad, diverse, and actually have some Black leadership and take this to your city council. Begin to have discussions with them. We actually had an attempt, we actually did this on a number of cities and not just in California, where before it went to just the back and forth with the council, is actually we'd have town halls where we would meet and pull together community members to talk about this issue. And then once they heard once they heard the story like I told, then they contacted their local elected officials. Then when we showed up to the local elected officials, they actually knew what was going on. So I think Kenny knows what the deal is, that we need to organize ourselves We need to build a coalition, and we need to be active on this. And people need to be informed about this. When you go out there to do something, look, tobacco smoking generally, and menthol smoking in particular, the main killer of Black folks, there's a period there. So if we want to do something about it, let's become knowledgeable about it and actually do something about it. So I appreciate your question, Ken.
So, and particularly with regard to the Cleveland, Dr. Gardiner, for quite some time, they haven't had a comment period at City Council. That's just been reinstituted, now. So what would you suggest in terms of making the case based on your research and presentation to convince, the City Council, even some of whom who may be smokers themselves, or know those who are, how to, that this is an important issue and it demands attention, immediate attention. What other suggestions could you offer us?
Well, it's interesting that you point out that that you haven't had a public comment period in Cleveland. I mean, I think that's just outrageous, frankly. Having said that, one thing that you can do is in most cities around the country, there's a time on the agenda to comment on things that aren't on the agenda. And let's say menthol is not on the agenda, then what you do is every week or day or whenever the council meets, you have 2 or 3 people begin that education project with their 2 or 3 minute comments on menthol, such it begins to prime the pump for the discussion with city council members. You also raised another good question. Some city council members, Black and or white, smoke, and they feel, compelled. They don't realize that the addiction that they have is through, and in a lot of cases, unfortunately, through the predatory marketing that I just have talked about. They need cessation services too, but I think the punchline here is they are not the problem. And I think they need to hear that from us, that the problem is the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry pumps money into the Black community to buy their silence. Some people are running around saying, well, if you take menthol cigarettes off the street, you're being racist. You're taking away our cigarette. And as I pointed out to you, the racism is from the tobacco industry that pushed this down our throat for the last 50 years. So there's anyway, I think you make a good point. Some members of city council are cigar smokers and want to keep that in mind. And so as somehow that being a cigar smoker is different from being a cigarette smoker. No, it's just as bad for you.
Yes, in terms of politics and politics being the art of the possible and being a local issue, does the tobacco lobby have as much of an influence on the local level as it does at the national level? And do they influence local officials to the same degree as they do those at the national level?
Yes, but it's yes to both things. But the higher you go up the food chain, the more difficult it becomes. This is, I've been talking about what's going on in the FDA. This has been going on for 12 years. Why hasn't the FDA done anything about it? It's because look, we did a little study a few years ago. This is back when Obama was a president. We were able to identify 16 tobacco lawyers who worked in the Obama administration. They didn't all work at the FDA or the OMB, but they worked in the OMB and the FDA and all throughout the government. So the tobacco industry is planted there. As it relates at the local level, they get local ministers to stand up for this. They get local groups to stand up for this. The National Urban League takes all sorts of money from the tobacco industry. Yeah, they do it both at the local and both at the local, state, and national. Look, the tobacco industry is the 6th largest conglomerate internationally in the world. And look, the punchline of all this, menthol cigarettes represents 36% of all tobacco revenue. 36%. And here we are, these Black folks trying to say, get rid of that. And they're like, we're going to get rid of 36% of our profits? You must be crazy. So just be aware of what the level of the fight that we're up against. I noticed that there's a question in here. Can you provide a simple message or statement that the average person can share with the average citizen, not directly connected with menthol and other flavored products? I think that's a great point, Greg. I think that goes back to the framework for our time. I think it just needs to be pointed out that the main vector of death and disease into the Black community are menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars. And getting these products out of our community will save Black lives. It's a period there. It's a period.
And no, Dr. Gardner, they've talked about like breaking up big tech, big ag. Is there, what has been the effort to try to break up big tobacco? Do you think, is that possible?
Let me come at that somewhat circuitously, because I'm not sure that under the type of corporate America that we live in, that we're going to break up big tech. Big tech might get more regulation. Hopefully big oil would get more, I agree with the concept. I appreciate that. What the tobacco industry is doing is they're going to find new ways to addict you. So the whole e-cigarette phenomena, remember e-cigarettes came out and they were interesting and new and dun-ta-dun-ta-dun-ta, and then Juul showed up and things skyrocketed. At that point, the tobacco industry stepped in. They bought Juul. They bought a huge percent of Juul. They bought Vooz. They bought all these different products. Same thing is happening. So that's one step. The second step is we have new products called heat not burn, where you heat the product as opposed to burn the product, and that supposedly, knock on wood, produces less carcinogens. I do a whole presentation on what's in the heat not burn that are similar to what's in regular tobacco. Then notice that they're going to then get into the marijuana game, and we need to be clear that, look, tobacco, marijuana, leaves on trees, bushes, they're all things we call biomasses. When you burn a biomass, they all produce the same chemicals. Some have specific chemicals in them, like THC in marijuana or nicotine in tobacco, but all the other carcinogens and toxins and acid aldehydes and other stuff are all there too. So I think we find ourselves in a difficult situation, particularly as human beings, to try and get ourselves out of this mud hole that we find ourselves in. And then this mud hole, of course, for Black people, was dug specifically for us by this industry. Not to put too sharp of a point on it anyway.
Yes, sir. You mentioned about marijuana, and I know you referenced work of colleague Dr. Yeager in terms of racialized geography and how our whole communities, as you showed throughout a lot of the slides, are saturated with these, these efforts by these institutions and organizations. There's been a lot of talk about reparations cannabis as being a mechanism through which, restorative or reparative reparations efforts could be marshaled on the local level, as in housing. If big tobacco does get involved with that, would that disrupt an effort to promote, reparations at the local level? Or do you think there's a way to still promote restitution as not a form of charity, but to a repair without having these industries still retaining control and being involved in the way that you mentioned?
Well, that's a hard one, because from my vantage point, we're mixing. I need to disaggregate it. Let me do it this way. I look at it this way, that we need to decriminalize marijuana use. We need to stop sending young brothers and sisters to jail for possession of marijuana. At the same time, we have to denormalize its use because it's bad for you. It may make you high and make you feel good and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but it's still bad for you. So decriminalize on the one hand and denormalize on the other hand. I think that's what needs to go down in that regard. And to the degree that reparations can take place at a local level based on taxes or use of monies from these different products, I think we have to be clear that I just have to go back to what I said. The products are bad for you. You know, as a public health doctor, I just have to. That's just the punchline. I noticed there's a number of things that are being put in the chat, and I don't know how to open up those things.
Those are from Dr. Lachelle Pugh, our Director of Research and Evaluation, along with our Executive Director has been developing, they've been developing billboard campaigns to post throughout the city that are advertising this effort around, you know, ending smoking and the impact of smoking on our communities. And that's what we place in the chat along with other surveys as well. And we're working on trying to.
I just don't know how to open them. Every time these things come up, I click on them and they want me to save it, and then I save it and I don't know where it is, and it doesn't say open it.
If you or others are in Cleveland, Dr. Pugh says we have 7 billboards in Cleveland proper, 1 in Youngstown, 1 in Warren, 1 in Canton, 1 in Lorraine. And so, yes, sir. I also wanted to ask, I know another question was asked in terms of how do you combat the efforts of the tobacco industry to thwart efforts at the local level. If you could speak more to the tactics that are used and what else could be done to subvert some of those or challenge some of those.
Well, the main tactics that they use is that they get Black spokespersons to speak for their issue, whether it's a minister or whether it's a councilman or whether it's somebody that's that is known in the community, that they get to speak for them. And they may not give them money directly, but they get something for it. We have to be able to get our own spokespersons to speak out on this issue. That's why I answered this in part earlier. You have to put together a broad-based coalition of different people, and they need to be, I guess the wrong word is known, but you know, well known in the community. So I think that's the key part of this whole thing.
Are there other questions that others have that you would like to ask Dr. Gardiner? If so, please put those in the chat or unmute yourself. And also just to mention that there's a question about the images of the billboards. They're being added to the chat. You can just click on it to open and view. And again, if you're in the area, you can also.
But that's what happens with me. I click on it, it doesn't open. When it clicks on, it comes up, it says, do you want to save this? And then if you hit save this, then it goes away, and then I don't know where to look for it. So this is not just true of what's going on here. It's just more of my, what do you call it? My bad computer skills. Anyway. K-Moss.
Dr. Gardiner, it will be found in your downloads on your computer if you clicked on it.
Okay, I'll have to do that.
Yes, it's there. It's there.
All right, I think we have a few minutes remaining. Again, are there any questions, any further comments anyone wants to offer for our speaker and presenter? And first, we want to thank you, Dr. Gardiner, for a very informative and very engaging presentation. And again, thank you for your work and those of your colleagues in continuing the fight and helping to inform us on what we must do to bring local change in Cleveland and surrounding areas. And so we're grateful for that. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.
Sir, I am hearing none. Let me say that we have a number of other events that are upcoming. Director Pugh or Director Pullen would like to make any mention about any of our events or activities that we have ongoing. We have an African American Policy Committee meeting that meets every month in November, the November 8th meeting. We're meeting with Dr. Vika Saini, who's the director of the Lown Institute. They just published a study on U.S. hospitals, certainly a matter that connects directly with the subject of no menthol, and their matter of social responsibility and health and racial equity. So we look forward to engaging conversation there, and their subsequent conversations that we look forward to having in the succeeding months to come. Again, we have a survey that we'd like for you to fill out if you haven't. And if you would like more information about it, there's information in the chat. And you can also contact us as well.
Zachary, can I ask you a question before we go?
Yes, sir, please.
So I'm hopeful that you folks will move forward in Cleveland. So is there a plan to get this, there's standard language for menthol restrictions and ending the sale of them that the Public Health Law Center in Minnesota has language on. Are we moving forward in Cleveland? And where are we? I mean.
Yes, sir. Well, we are. Some of us are, remote elsewhere, but we're still, have our hearts and minds there. We have been working through the Center for Black Health and Equity with representatives from the Public Health Law Center to develop education campaigns, and we're in the middle of doing that as we speak. And the Billboard campaign is a part of that. And so, we are building to try to contact representatives at the local level and city council. There's an upcoming election that, based on how it goes, will also help guide our efforts further. But we've had a conversation with the mayor, or one of the mayoral candidates for another subject, anti-racism in hospitals, although he is very much interested in helping us to push forward this effort and agenda as well. Mr. Justin Bibb. So we're looking forward to his support if he does succeed in becoming mayor. And based on who else is elected to council, we also plan to identify those persons and continue to push them for their support and advocacy. But those efforts are ongoing at the moment. But we will continue. Yeah.
I was able to open and see some of the billboards. Those are excellent billboards. Excellent. It's a good first start. Excellent. Excellent.
All right. Director Pullen, Dr. Pugh, you have anything further?
Yavanka Hall, who is also the executive director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, is going to City Council every Monday and speaking on different things that deal with menthol in our community. And she's advocating for menthol and for lead. So we are pushing those efforts in that agenda very strongly for Cleveland in every way possible. So we are definitely working. We have the coalition, we have the policy meetings every month, and we have community advocates that are a part of those meetings who are helping us forge forward in this effort to menthol-free communities. So we are definitely working diligently, as Dr. Williams stated, to make sure that this stays in the forefront and in pushing it so that we can move forward with some laws and some legislation and all that wonderful stuff that we're trying to put in place for our communities. So definitely doing that. We are at the 11 o'clock hour. And I just want to remind everybody, because we want to be cognizant of time, we want to say thank you to Dr. Phil Gardiner for all that he's doing and all the work that you've done. Congratulations on retirement. Must be nice. I'm looking forward to it. If you have any further questions, or if there's something that you think about afterwards, please let us know. We also went live on Facebook, so if there's questions out there that we have not gotten to, we will definitely send them to you, or we will try to get back to those persons as soon as possible. The Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition is fighting for and advocating for injustices in our community on every level possible. Anything that affects us, African American people, minority people, we want to make sure that we're fighting to bring some equity and justice in those arenas. We would like to thank you all for participating today. You can contact us at the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition on our Facebook page, or you can contact us via email at Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition.com. We are on our website. We are here and available. And we also want people to share their stories about menthol. And so if you would like to do that, please get in touch with us. We would love to have your stories about menthol. And the other thing is that we need everyone to go out in Cleveland, Youngstown, Warren, take a picture next to the billboard and put it on your Facebook page and hashtag it, tag Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, hashtag
NEOBHC Choose Life.
Choose Life, yes. So we want you all to be a part of that process, and that's how we're bringing awareness to our community. So be a part of the solution, and we thank you all. Yvanka, is there anything else that I missed, or is there anything that we need to say? Oh, also we have COVID-19 support groups every second and fourth Tuesday of the month from 5:30 to 6:30. So if you know someone who's has survived COVID, someone who hasn't had a loss because of COVID, or is a long hauler, please come and join us every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. Policy is every second Tuesday of the month at 2 o'clock. And we just want you all to just be engaged and be a part of the healing of our community. By supporting the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, you become a member. You can join us in our force, you can volunteer, and you can donate. So come on out, be a part, and thank you all for all that you've done to support us so far.
Also, membership information has been added to the chat.
And we are looking for youth ambassadors for the No Menthol campaign. So if you know some young people who would like to be a part of that, please direct them towards us or send us their contact information, and we will be happy to get in touch with them. The young people, we need them because they will take us to the next level. So definitely looking for those youth ambassadors as well. Again, thank you on behalf of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition. Zachary, do you have any closing remarks?
No, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Gardiner, and thank my colleagues, and just hope you all have a great day.
Look, thank you for having me, folks.
Thank you. You have a great day.